it was really secret. Like you had to sign an NDA and they snuck you in the back door, and it was like this hippie kind of, weird thing where you kind of hide. And so I ended up in San Francisco, living and working there and trying to figure out how we would scale interventions around mindfulness, human development. The point of startups and innovation and disruption is that we all get to play together to do something and make an impact, no matter what the success looks like. Carrots at the farm gate or a unicorn, there's a lot in between that. They had a lot of money and they were really getting into that space in their life where they're trying to figure out what's next. And so many of them had lost their identity to their company, to the money. They didn't feel that they had a community. And when I was, a baby journo, I had a university lecturer take me off to one side and say, look, you'll never make it in TV. You just don't look I speak Slovenian and Italian with my grandparents on my mum's side and a bit of Dutch with my dad's side. And, we're schnitzel and curry people. I always joke about it. The things that you think are the worst things to happen are often the thing that spurs whatever is next. But at the moment, it feels terrible. But if you just...
Welcome, Megan. It's great to have you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, really looking forward to interviewing you today. I interviewed your other half, so to speak, on the Disrupt Radio, Alan Jones, and that was an amazing interview. I totally loved that, and he had so many insights and such a lovely guy. And I've listened to your show quite often as well, and you guys have so much experience between you. So I was really, really looking forward to getting you on the show and looking forward to you sharing all your insights with my audience.
Oh, I mean, I'm hopeful that it'll all be useful, but, you can listen to us also on Disrupt Radio. If you want specific advice about problems, you can write into us as well. But I hope we can get into some deep bits and pieces. And also I can say whatever I want now because Alan's not here. So I feel I have carte blanche.
It's actually a really good dynamic between you two. I love it. Yeah.
He's a good mate. I think that helps as well. I sometimes feel like, Alan is, as people in the startup ecosystem will know, he's phenomenal. I mean, he's been there since the beginning of, the Australian startup ecosystem. So he's seen it all, but he's also someone who I think people will sometimes pull their punches or they won't want to say a certain thing. And I don't have that problem. I just give it to him. And I think people are often surprised at how we'll talk to each other. But I think being able to be that open and honest is kind of, both interesting to listen to, but also good. I think all of these ideas should be challenged all the time. That's the point of innovation and disruption.
Absolutely, yeah. It's part of the whole ecosystem, really. It's an important part. And actually, I joked with Alan. I was saying, look, are you 100 or 200 years old? Because I looked at your LinkedIn profile and it never ends. It never ends.
He likes having his fingers in a lot of pies. It's really amazing. But, also the breadth of that experience is so incredible. He just... The stuff he comes out with, he's like, in the early 90s, we were working on this. And, he was working on a Netflix.
He told us about that.
Before that was even, he's very ahead of his time.
Yeah. And I know you also have a lot of experience as well. So I guess we could start with you're telling our audience a bit about yourself and your background and the experience that you've had and, your early years and what led you to what you're doing now.
Yeah. Oh gosh. So this is try and think back. Well, so from a start, I'm from Western Australia, and my mum is Slovenian and my dad is Sri Lankan. So I think from a pretty early age, I felt very other. We didn't always speak English at home, and I was a little skinny brown kid growing up in a very white Western Australia at that time. And I think I always felt like a bit of an outsider in that way. And, in hindsight, I think that's really helped because I'm often an outsider in a lot of the things that I've done. I was really interested in singing and music and things like that, and ended up getting into journalism and also studying voice. And so worked as a voiceover artist and became a journalist with the ABC. as soon as I was able, like, you know, I was working in cafes and doing things like that, and then running over to the ABC and doing little fill-in gigs and bits and pieces as soon as I could. And, you know, that was my focus. I guess that was my big intention all through my 20s. I moved to London, and then I moved over to Melbourne and lived here for about 7 years.
Okay.
And got really interested in emergency broadcasting. And so I worked a lot in very stressful situations, you know, like, you know, covering hurricanes, and I was a fire and emergency services broadcaster for a while.
Right. Were you there for the 2019 fires that we had here, those terrible fires? Were you?
Yeah, the 2009. Yeah, so I was one of the journos in the Black Saturday bushfires.
Oh, wow.
And so before then, I had become really interested in how to manage stress and anxiety, because I had these jobs where I'm very good in a crisis. Like, I'm really good when things are stressful and things are, you know, hitting the fan, and in a newsroom environment with really tight deadlines, things like that. I'm great in that environment, and I'm not so great about coming down. You know, I'd be getting home and not being able to sleep. And so I got really interested in yoga and mindfulness and meditation, and did my yoga teacher training, just because I was one of those annoying students who would stay after class and ask the teacher all the questions. And they were like, why don't you just do a teacher training? So I did it not to teach, but just because I was interested.
Yeah.
And started teaching on the side while I was still working at ABC.
Yeah.
But then when the Black Saturday bushfires happened, like a lot of journos and emergency workers and a lot of Victoria at that time, I was quite traumatised. I had PTSD and ended up deciding to take a role over in Asia, in Bangkok, you know, working as a producer, and, you know, started working there and doing that. I mean, I'd been working for Radio Australia before, which is Southeast Asia, you know, specialist bureau, and the Pacific. And so I was working over there and, you know, starting to freelance for a bunch of different organisations and news services, which was really interesting. You know, I'd never really lived overseas other than London, which is really just Australia with, you know, more drinking and a bit cold, you know. And so around about that time, a lot of my yoga students from Melbourne started hitting me up to do retreats. They were saying, you know, you're in Thailand, you should just run a little yoga retreat for us. And I was like, I've never run a retreat. I don't know how to do that. But I thought, I'll just try. I'll do one. I've been to a few yoga retreats. I'll put it together. I'll put a program together and see what happens. So I did one, and a lot of my students from Melbourne came over and had a really good time, and then they were telling their friends about it. And so by word of mouth, my first company was born. Well, my first company that made any money. We won't talk about the other ones. And so Shiny, Happy, Healthy was born.
Like the song.
Well, the Shiny Happy People song. No, that's not where I took it from, but you know, I think it was just something.
It just came to my head immediately. You know?
Yeah. I mean, I think really it was how I wanted to be in the world. That's where those words came from for me, because I was like, I just want to be happy and healthy. And I was working with a coach at the time, and he was saying, but it's something more than that. And I was like, I just want everyone that I interact with to feel like they've had some extra sunshine in their day. And then that's kind of where it was born from. So I started teaching these retreats, and very quickly they became, you know, like the people who came before were really excited about it, and they would tell other people. And so I started getting more requests for it. And, you know, now with the startup lens on, I can see that that's like market demand, like coming out and, you know, wanting to do them. And so, I mean, this is back in 2009, 2010. So around this time, you know, when blogging and, you know, Twitter and communities weren't being called communities yet, this was a period where I was able to, you know, without any coding experience other than like plugging widgets into WordPress, build a bit of a site, start doing these very hokey marketing campaigns, building Facebook pages and inviting people to come, and building an email list. All things that I really did accidentally start with. but I think also, I was still commentating on health and well-being, mindfulness for radio programs, which of course is going to help you out. And I was still appearing on the radio talking about, the coup in Thailand and, the Khmer Rouge trials in Cambodia and things like that. And then I was running these, lovely chill yoga retreats in the south of Thailand.
Right.
And for the next 5 years, slowly the journalism sort of stuff went down and the retreat stuff went up. So I started running a lot of retreats every year, building on the marketing knowledge of it. A lot of the people who came to retreats one year wanted to come back another year, but wanted to go somewhere new. So I started running them in Bali and Sri Lanka and Croatia, Mexico, kind of looping around. And then I'd come back to Australia for a few months, see my family and host a radio program for ABC, especially over the summer, like the fire emergency service stuff.
Yeah.
And it was through going to Mexico a lot that I started meeting a lot of people from San Francisco. So going to San Francisco just meant that, I think a lot of really excited people who were kind of one foot in this hippie world, for lack of a better word, mindfulness was really starting to take off as a corporate potential then. Wisdom 2.0 was being launched. And so I ended up in San Francisco, living and working there and trying to figure out how we would scale interventions around mindfulness, human development, and looking at how we could use human behavioral tech to make a difference in these sorts of things. I feel like this is a long and winding road. I was there for almost 5 years. Yeah. I moved back to Australia, mainly for family reasons, and then ended up working in accelerators here with the proviso that I was allowed to shoehorn mindfulness and leadership training and development into those programs.
Yeah.
And that's how I've ended up at Monash University doing that for all of their startup programs.
Yeah.
And then they opened a new centre here at Monash called the Monash Centre for Consciousness and Contemplative Studies. We call it M3CS because it's a very long name.
Yeah.
And I have been here for the last 18 months or so, commercialising the amazing research that they do here around mindfulness, compassion, resilience, peak performance, really, really amazing stuff. And my job is to figure out how we apply this to real world situations. And then, I moonlight at Disrupt Radio just for a bit of fun so I can play with Alan.
Yeah. Sounds awesome. Well, what a journey. It's interesting how you've ended up doing that and the mindfulness. And it's something that, there's a lot more awareness of it these days. And so have you seen that awareness increase over the time that you've been doing all of that?
Yeah, so much. Like one of my early contracts when I was a baby yoga teacher was going in and doing little contracts and yoga classes with football clubs. Okay. I also did some stuff with the Australian Ballet, and it was really secret. Like you had to sign an NDA and they snuck you in the back door, and it was like this hippie kind of, weird thing where you kind of hide. And often I would do executive coaching, which at that time I didn't really know, they were sort of saying, can you come in and talk to us about how we can apply mindfulness to the leadership of the organization? And I'd be like, I'd go in and kind of get the mindfulness 101, but it was super secret. And now, I give keynotes at the Google Cloud conference, where they bring me in and, we get to do these full investigations of how do we make tech more human? How do you connect with each other? Yeah. How are you applying the inner development goals to your organization and the products that you create? Like it's a much more integrated, amazing conversation now, which is really exciting. It is. The mental health conversation, especially with founders, how can we tackle that head on?
Yeah, it's pretty grueling out there. And it's so important what you're doing, I think. And it's great that awareness has increased so much. It's very helpful because the industry has really looked a lot of just tech. And I've interviewed others like Liz Swigart. She said, look, it has to be human-centered, It shouldn't be tech-centered. It has to be human-centered first. And I guess that's similar to what you're doing. And I have to say, I looked at some of your videos on the website where you're doing some, I think it was some sort of meditation, and I think you have a real knack for that, because I actually felt I think it was just 1 or 2 minutes. I felt, I feel so peaceful now.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Mission accomplished.
yeah,
I think that's one of the things, especially startup founders get stuck on. They're thinking, I cannot add another thing to my day.
mm,
You know, it's already too much. I don't have enough minutes in the day to
yeah,
sleep or eat or take care of
yeah,
myself.
yeah,
And so one of the things that I see as my mission in life is making this stuff really easy and accessible to people
mm,
immediately.
mm,
Like, we're not here to
mm,
be super smart or fancy. I mean,
yeah,
I get to work here with a group of amazing researchers who are looking into things like optimism and, the neuroscience of dreaming and,
mm,
really amazing contemplative wisdom traditions. I get to be the dumbest person in the room every day, which is so nice, because then I get to look at what would a regular person in the street get
yeah,
from this?
yeah,
How do we make it super accessible? And how do we improve humanity here by using these interventions? What does that look like?
yeah.
And so
Well, if
it's kind of like
you need any more
education.
dumb people, I can volunteer.
Yeah. Fantastic. Great. I've got a bunch of new courses coming up. We need guinea pigs.
Okay. Yeah, because like when I had my startup as well, I just always thought like everyone here is much smarter than me in different areas. I'm just good at sort of big ideas person, bringing people together. But I see myself as dumb, as well. And I think having that low bar is actually good as,
Yeah.
for yourself, like not in a bad way. Like when I say dumb, I just say, I think a lot of people are brighter than me, but I have my attributes as well. They're just different. I probably have more EQ than IQ, for example. I mean, my
Yeah.
father was like almost a genius, 180 IQ, and he, how he cleaned my mother's piano. He hosted down, put it outside and hosted it down. So
Oh, the poor piano. Oh my gosh.
yeah,
Yeah.
so IQ isn't everything.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it, as well? Like, the older I get, the more I realize I just don't know. But I
Mm,
think you also get to a point where you're less afraid of that. You're realizing
exactly.
the things that you don't
Yeah,
realize.
yeah,
That's exciting. Like,
yeah.
I,
It is.
I kind of love that I get to be the one who asks the questions. And I think I got over looking good. Like, I got over the idea that, it's important to ask the smartest questions so that everyone thinks you're brilliant. It's like,
Yeah,
wouldn't it be amazing if the questions I ask open this up for 1,000 people who get to go
mm,
and change their lives because it now makes sense to them?
yeah,
Like, I will sound like the idiot if that's going to unlock something
yeah.
for more people. Why would you not?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I always had that issue. It's like, even though I've gone to uni, but I mean, my early days, I left school, didn't finish year 11. I worked in multiple different jobs, and had a funny life like that. But I always had this thing about academics, like feel intimidated by academics. Now I'm like, who cares? Like I'm not that articulate, but I'm just being myself, being authentic, and saying, asking the questions that come to my head, and probably the average person may have the same question, so it doesn't really matter.
That's exactly
Yeah,
it. And look, I work with a lot of academics. I am
yeah,
not an academic.
yeah.
I have a degree in performing arts. I'm
Uh-huh.
really good in a cafe setting. I'm great on a radio program and emergencies, but like, I haven't,
Yeah,
I've contributed to papers, but
yeah.
I don't have a master's, I don't have a
Okay,
PhD.
okay.
I think in a university setting,
Yeah.
that generally garners less respect. And,
Mm,
that's the currency that they come by here, which is
yeah.
fine. But in the world, what matters is, can you communicate clearly? Is
Mm,
what you're doing making an impact and making a
yeah.
difference? And really, that's, to be the hippie about it,
Yeah.
is my ego really dented by what that matters?
Yeah.
Like, am I whether or not I have a piece of paper, or am I being useful? Would it be more useful for me to get that piece of paper, or is it more useful for humans for me to do the work that I'm
Mm.
doing, and to look at how I can make that difference?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, like talking about mental health as well. Obviously, you know a lot about that and working that. But from what I understand as well, if you have a really good purpose and you're working for something good, that really improves your mental health dramatically.
Yeah.
As opposed to people that are just working on their own stuff, their own ego, making lots of money. I'm a bit, I wouldn't say anti unicorns, but the sort of the whole thing around that, and I've interviewed quite a few social enterprise founders and funders, and I really like that space as well. And I think the space you're in as well is really, really important. So it's, yeah.
Yeah. As someone who has coached hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of founders,
Right.
I'm not anti-unicorns. I'm not anti people making a lot of money or doing well in their startup, but I've tried to address the mental health issue at a lot of different stages along the startup journey. And when I was working in San Francisco, I was working with a lot of people who had an exit and they had a lot of money, and they were really getting into that space in their life where they're trying to figure out what's next. And so many of them had lost their identity to their company, to the money. They didn't feel that they had a community. And so one of the first places that I start is by looking at what success really looks like for someone. It's a really easy, Simon Sinek often calls it the 5 whys. That you do that exercise. It's like, I've got to get a new car. Okay, why? Well, if I get a new car, then it's going to show that I have a lot of money. Okay, why is it important that you have a lot of money? Well, then people are going to know that the business is doing well. Why is it important that people think that the business is doing well? Well, because then I'm not a failure. Why does it matter that you're not a failure? Well, because John Smith bullied me in high school and I want to show that asshole that I made it now. And it's like, okay, so is this about John Smith? Because he's still back there when you were 12 years old, and you're making decisions now that don't really suit your life or your budget or, what it is that you're doing. And so, yes, having a unicorn is a brilliant success and that's awesome. But success can look like moving to the country and selling carrots at a farm gate as well, if that's what feels good for you. I wish there were more. Sorry.
No. I mean, that's what this show's all about. Like it's called, Startup Fail Wisdom. It's like the wisdom we get from failures. And failure is not a dirty word. It is something that we learn from. And it's with the startup world as well. For me, it's all about the journey as well. So fail, succeed, whatever you want to call that. Like as in, if you cash out or the business has a lot of customers, whatever that may be, or doesn't, or if you're one of the 19 out of 20 that doesn't succeed in that way, you might go on to your next one. But you've learned so much along the way, and for me, it was a great journey. I totally enjoyed it. So it was all about the journey for me. So that was a success in my mind.
Well, and I think as well, the things that you think are the worst things to happen are often the thing that spurs whatever is next. But at the moment, it feels terrible. But if you just wait, something different will happen. Time moves on. If people are looking for resources about this, The Comfort Book by Matt Haig, for anyone who's really wrestled with their mental health and is looking for, a good conversation about how to take that time and to zoom out and really look at what's important. I mean, I'll give you an example of a failure. And I've told this story at Fuck Up Nights. Shout out.
I was going to answer that question anyway. So,
I moved to the States kind of, I started spending more and more time there. And I was talking to a bunch of different places about, creating a mindfulness product. There were a lot of cool new hardware products coming onto the market, and I was consulting on those and looking at those. And then there was a gaming company. They do like training and development for, big organizations where they go out and they play games, and they have an app. It's like a scavenger hunt. And so I was creating a mindfulness product for them.
Okay.
And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go to San Francisco. I'll live here properly and like design this thing. And I just joined as an employee, as you do. Like you go in and I moved everything over there. I mean, I didn't have that much. I was living out of a bag, but I moved my life to San Francisco, and we designed the game and got it up and running. And that was an absolute baptism of fire for me, because I was like working with a bunch of UX designers and I didn't know what UX stood for. And, we're trying to figure all this out, and we're working with these proprietary apps and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, okay, this is fine. Anyway, we get it to market and it starts going pretty well. And then they pretty much realized they didn't need me anymore, because they had it, they had the IP, they were ready to go. And so they fired me on Christmas Eve.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah. And back then you had 10 days to leave the country on an E3 visa. So
wow.
I was like, you got to get out unless you could get a stay of execution or, you know, I managed to negotiate a little bit with them where they didn't like file that I got fired. But basically I had to get out of the country or figure it out. And at that time I had fallen in love with someone who was like, please, I love you, please stay. And I was like, okay, I'm going to find a job, and ran around like crazy trying to find something.
Yeah.
And through a bunch of random connections and people who I'd spoken to, and a very generous girlfriend of mine who introduced me to this awesome friend, Casey, shout out to Casey, who ended up hiring me so that I could start to develop my own programs in training and development using this mindfulness basis and contracting out, you know, via his consulting practice. You know, the TLDR of the story is that I went to Mexico to go and get my new visa. And while I was there, the guy dumped me. So I kind of had a visa, but then I kind of lost my reason for staying in San Francisco. But out of that, that's what Mindful Under Fire, that's how that was born, that company.
Wow.
One of our first clients, again, you know, from having a great conversation with a woman at a party who was working in legal at Google, was looking for someone to help with the mindfulness of the legal team, was really stressed because they were designing the algorithm. Again, you know, this is how algorithms used to be trained, kids, where you'd have a room full of baby journalists looking, not journalists, lawyers, looking at, you know, a search function of a word like jihad, and then looking at the disturbing images that come up and then sorting through them.
Is this early days at Google?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it was that early days at Google in its sense, but in the, you know, how they were designing for the safety. This was like when safety teams were becoming a big thing of like, how much are we responsible for what shows up in the algorithm and the search algorithm? And I'm pretty sure they offshore all of that stuff now as well, which is
that's fascinating.
You know, working with all of these teams to look at, you know, how do they debrief and talk about how they feel after they've looked at these sort of disturbing images and struggled with that stuff. And so I got to start doing that. So like, that's a great early client.
Not bad. Just a small client.
Yeah.
I've heard of them somewhere.
Just a little bit. And so, you know, getting to do all of that stuff, which was really interesting. And then, you know, having that roll out and, you know, getting to do a lot of work with prisons and homeless people. And, you know, now that company does a ton of work with emergency workers. I mean, again, I thought that the whole company would shut down and fail during COVID because in my mind, it was impossible to deliver the value that we were delivering online. I thought from a duty of care point of view and from what we do, you need to be in the room with people and you need to be, you know, we would have social workers and psychiatrists, psychologists go out to organizations, to the prison. It was expensive, but, you know, for me, it was this duty of care. And then because of my work here at Monash during the lockdowns, like I just wasn't able to do as much over in the States and I wasn't able to get over there. And so the team made a series of pivots because I kind of finally prized my, you know, controlling hands off everything. And the business grew like 7 times.
Oh, really?
Lockdowns because we moved everything online and suddenly we could get in everywhere. So, you know, coroner's offices, hospitals, emergency workers, emergency services, high schools, like places where people were really struggling, you know, with how things were going, and also spaces where people really needed support and sometimes anonymous support. And so that just became a beautiful space that we could provide for them online. And then that grew really well because I got out of the way, which felt like a failure, but also a success, you know, a personal failure, but
not really, because you hear a lot of stories about startups that get to a certain point, and then the founder has to get out of the way, everyone's way, give up their role as CEO, whatever it may be. and just do what you're good at or what you enjoy. But if there's people who can do things, like as a startup founder, where we do multiple things, all different areas, and then it comes to a point where, you know, other people will generally do it better than us, you know. So I think that's an ego thing as well, isn't it? Like, this is my startup. I'm the founder.
Yeah.
Nobody's taking this over.
Well, I think I've been so interested in the experience design. You know, like I love human-centered design. I love the humanity of all of these things. And I come from a background of, sure, you'd be talking to someone on the radio over the phone, or you'd be talking to a family when they're having a really difficult time. Being there in person, being able to sense what's needed and provide that is one of my big superpowers. And so I think it is putting your ego aside to look at what's actually helpful for people. The anonymity and the being in your tracksuit pants at home actually helps more people than needing to get dressed and come into the office and do a debrief with someone who's sitting in a cold, impersonal room. Sitting there with your cat on your lap and talking about a high school shooting that you had to attend, that's a lot more of a safe and comfortable space for people. So you start to really put yourself in their shoes, and then it becomes less about me as the linchpin of the business. It becomes about, you know, what are we providing for people where they can really get in a space that they need and inform that.
And it goes back to the purpose or the why of the business as well.
Yeah.
Which is exactly that, which fantastic. You know, it's interesting talking about algorithms. I mean, with social media these days and certain platforms, I'm not particularly talking about Google. It's more of the, you know, the other, the ones that Mark and Co. and et cetera run. I won't say the names, that Mark, and or some of the other platforms. The algorithms, I heard, I was listening to another podcast and saying, look, society used to be based on community, church, you know, family, all of that. The last 15 years is based on algorithms. And I thought, and it's really creating a big divide. And I think it's affecting people's mental health. It's affecting the whole world, I think. What are your thoughts on that in mindfulness when, you know, I mean, because you're actually in the room with those people that were working on those algorithms.
Yeah. It's tricky, right? Like, I think I love tech. Like, I love it. I love making things more, you know, I love making things easier. I love innovation. I love new. I love all of that stuff. And I think it's a hard line to try and find where you're using the tech and you're using the innovation and where it's using you. And I think that's a really good conversation that's been coming to the fore over the last few years, especially with kids and teenagers, you know, around gaming and screens and phones and scrolling and things like that. I think awareness is at the heart of so much of what I'm trying to do. And when I say awareness, I mean self-awareness. So, you know, I can sit here and be like, you should care about screens and screen time, and we should care about mental health and climate change and homeless people and, you know, peace in the Middle East. And, you know, you should care about all of these things. I see increasing self-awareness as an access to increasing presence in the world, increasing compassion, increasing diversity and, you know, inclusion and the way in which humans interact with each other. And so I think that so much of what we are trying to do is around giving people the realization, or, you know, at least putting a screen up around the realization that they have agency and choice in how they interact with these things. The more they know, you know, for example, Professor Craig Hassard here at M3CS does a bunch of really amazing units on attention spans. You know, humans in the last decade now have a worse attention span than a goldfish, which is kind of... But you can do something about that. So, for example, having your phone, I actually had to look for my phone then. That was exciting. Having your phone on the desk face up is worse for your attention. Having it face down is slightly better. Having it in your bag or out of the room is even better. Like, it increases your attention span. And that's not even necessarily with anything happening on it. Turning off your notifications, for example, putting a time limit on your notifications.
Yep.
There are a bunch of really amazing programs that the Centre for Humane Technology is doing. Tristan Harris, who did that amazing documentary on Netflix,
The Social
really...
Dilemma, that one?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And
why I
it
turn all
makes
my
you...
notifications off.
Yeah. And you start to realize, though, yes, we can, and, this is coming out at the moment. The attorneys general in the US are all looking at suing Meta and looking at suing them for doing the wrong thing. And I'm a little on the fence on whose fault it is.
Yeah.
I think you're putting a product out there into the world, just like you'd put, say, a car out there into the world, and you do it with the best intentions of getting people from A to B, from creating a community, whatever it is. I think they need to be transparent about the research, and I'd like to see a lot of the research that that they've done internally, so that people can be really well informed about, if you eat this product 20 times a day, you will be obese. If you look at this screen 20 times a day, you will have a greater incidence of mental health or concerns or poor dreaming or poor sleep. If we know those things, then you can make choices.
Yeah, and there was some research on that came out internal with Instagram, how it was affecting young women really badly, and they just covered it up.
Yeah. And again, it's really tricky, because I look at that and I think that's, you even talk about something near your phone and we know that it picks it up, and all of a sudden I was talking about Dulux paint chips and I'm getting all these interior design accounts being like, are you interested in it? And I'm like, whoa, how did that happen?
Yeah.
If young women are talking about weight or issues or body issues or all those sorts of things, then those are going to be the things that they're going to be looking for and interacting with. In my opinion, the platform is bringing to light the things that are already happening. There's a beautiful podcast called I Weigh with Jamila Jamil that is, a lot about how you can interact with things and how young women, put their worth in their weight or how they look. And, I think that's also a fantastic movement, the I Weigh movement on Instagram, where they're really, creating this beautiful community around bodies.
Yeah.
From when I was growing up and we had magazines like Cosmo and Dolly, where all you could see were these super skinny white girls who didn't in any way look like me. Yeah. Now I feel like these platforms make me feel more accepted and like I'm part of a global community, and that, how I look is like, oh, you're actually kind of ethnically ambiguous and you can fit in a bunch of different places. Yeah. So, personally, I found it more accepting. But I'm a bit older and wiser than a 13-year-old who's got a poor body image. So
much harder at that age.
I think it's a hard conversation. Yeah.
I think a lot of those magazines like Dolly, etc., were run by, old, overweight white men making money out of that.
They still are. Yeah.
Well, they rule the world, don't they?
Yeah.
And talking about men and women and the industry, there's not many women in the startup industry. And so what advice, if this is for early startup founders, so if I'm doesn't matter, young or old woman, older, there's no such thing as old women, older, well-aged, what advice would you give them if they're getting into the industry? Because as I understand, it's much more difficult in areas of funding and pitching and getting into incubators and all sorts of stuff. Like what's going on there, and what advice could you give these women that are getting into startups?
I would disagree that there are necessarily fewer women involved in startups. I would just say there are fewer women getting the kudos, attention, and definitely fewer getting the funding. Okay. If you look at who is running most accelerator programs, most behind the scenes, coaching, doing the due diligence in the junior positions, junior VCs, analysts, they're mainly women. So the people doing a lot of the grunt work and running the thankless tasks, as is basically, in so many ways, and I've talked about this with so many people in the ecosystem, the thankless tasks in the ecosystem are mostly done by women. And it's just a microcosm of how the rest of the world works. You know, invisible labor, it's what we do really well. And just as a plug for this book, because it's just my Bible on this, Invisible Women by Christina Criado Perez is phenomenal and helps shine a light on like how we could potentially do something around this and legislate around it and what we could actually do, and how you design products to actually service all of the community. But look, I think, you know, I'm involved with a group called Girls in Tech, which is just a fantastic organization. It started in the US and came out to Australia and has a beautiful chapter here in Melbourne. And, you know, Susan Brown, who's phenomenal, works at Deloitte in innovation and does amazing things, is the one who kind of brought that over here and has been doing that. And, you know, we know that loads and loads and loads of girls and women want to be working in tech and are interested in it, and then they don't stay. And so I think there are a bunch of things that we could obviously change. I would love it if, you know, men would suddenly be more aware and conscious and change the way they do things and stack the dishwasher occasionally in the office.
I have done that.
I have to say, like, I feel very lucky here. I've done it maybe twice since I've worked in this office, but I work with a bunch of philosophers and they're all very woke and amazing. And
with our developers, I don't think they'd be stacked.
Just not as much self-awareness all the time. But, you know, I think there's also, you know, I mean, even this week alone, there have been articles about some really horrendous things that some very high up male VCs have said and how they're just absolutely protected because of the money. And it perpetuates the cycle. Whoever has the money has the power, and then they can gatekeep and they can decide that it's just tokenism to have women, even though we know that actually tokenism does a really good job, like affirmative action does as well. Like it puts other people in the room and gives them an opportunity, and those people really grab that opportunity and do something with it. On the other side, I feel like there's a lot of women like myself who were working in startups and working in that way, where we decided to kind of step sideways. Like I kind of got tired of the thanklessness of it. And, you know, I was often a person who was denied access to traditional investment spaces or traditional kind of mentoring spaces. And so I kind of found ways to do it differently. And they'd be doing, you know, one of the biggest, you know, accelerator programs, but then I'd be getting phone calls of a startup founder crying to me because I'm a safe space and I'm a good mental health advocate, but they don't want to tell their mentor what's actually going on because then they're not going to want to fund me. Like there's a fundamental disconnect with how that's working. And then I have to keep it a secret that they're not doing well mentally and you can't talk about it publicly. It's, you know, and then there's the emotional labor of having someone's mental health on your conscience and on your responsibility in that space as well, which is really exhausting. And never being the person that they'll thank or acknowledge, and you don't get equity for doing tissues. So, yeah, I think that's, you know, I'm describing more of the pitfalls, and what you were really asking is like, how can people get into it? We know that women tend to helm more successful businesses. We know that older people tend to helm more successful businesses. And, you know, traditionally they used to say that it was your seventh venture that is the money spinner. So I'm like, okay, I'm about 5 in. So that's a good sign.
Only 2 to go.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, you're older, you're wiser, you're able to work in different ways. I think technology has been such a beautiful and amazing leveler. I think one of the big amazing things that I notice, especially with more senior women, like middle and upper management women who are interested in getting into something new, or, you know, I work with a lot of people here at the university who are researchers, even middle, later stage career researchers who are women who haven't been able to, you know, succeed in the traditional tracks that white men have been able to in a university setting, who have such incredible networks because they've befriended people, they're selfless, they're altruistic, they're amazing listeners, you know, they've raised families and children and, you know, they've really connected with their communities. Now they have these incredible contact books. And I feel like in startups especially, having an amazing contact book,
That's so
knowing who to call, how to solve those problems and those human problems, is absolute superpower.
It is. That's a huge advantage.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think, having those great connections is great, but also, and this is 101, having a problem that you really want to solve. The more women we get in there who are really excited about solving problems with women for women, that's going to also hopefully change the way in which we do things. I don't want to see another group of 5 men in their 20s trying to solve a female community issue somewhere because that's the pivot that they could make with the millions of dollars they were given. It's like, can we have more people of color and more women and more minority communities trying to solve the problems that they are deeply affected by, or make it an imperative that those people are on the team when they're solving that problem?
I was listening to your podcast, and Alan was saying every 3 months or so he gets somebody pitching for Facebook for dogs.
I'm all for it. Take my money.
Me too. I think he should fund it. You really know when you get back, when you get on the radio.
Absolutely. Oh, I have a very sweet lockdown dog who's got me through many hard times in the past few years. So I'm all for it. I am one of those terrible people where they're like, oh yeah, we could totally start a business for bespoke leashes. And I'm like, oh, what colors does it come in?
I always regretted that I couldn't actually bring my dog to the incubator at Macquarie Uni when I was there. Because there are some startups. There was one legal startup, I forget what it was called, and everyone could bring their dogs, and it was awesome, like they're very therapeutic, I find.
They're the best. And, I was originally getting my dog because I was thinking this will be amazing for founders, because all my dog wants to do is lie on his back and have his feet, tickled and his tummy scratched. But I bring him in here sometimes. He's very mindful.
Well, my dog is pretty much the same. It's a Chihuahua and thinks he's huge, so.
Yeah. The Chihuahuas are very particular, aren't they? They're just like, who do you think you are? And it's like, oh, buddy.
We've got 4 cats, and if we say, Pancho, don't do that, he's straight away like, he's like, we call him the little policeman.
Oh, cute. That's lovely.
The question I love asking at the moment is, what is a question that you would love somebody to have asked you that they've never asked?
That's a hard question.
I know.
A question?
Or something about you you'd love people to know that they don't know, a question that you'd like people to ask, and you might have done an interview and said, I wish they asked that question.
Gosh, I don't really know. I think this sounds terrible, but I think I'm gabby and mouthy enough that I often just say what I need to say anyway. But if I'm thinking about that as a younger self, one of the things that I've noticed that I was never vocal about, and I've almost deliberately said it when we first started speaking today, talking about my background and my heritage. And it's something, when I was, a baby journo, I had a university lecturer take me off to one side and say, look, you'll never make it in TV. You just don't look the part.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it was a terrible thing to say, I think, especially because I was very young in my course. Everyone in my course was a bit older. And, I was one of a few brown people in my year, but, the majority, especially of the women, are just, skinny and blonde and look a particular way. And I was always pretty insecure anyway, and I love audio. I'm a musician and I wanted to be in radio anyway, so I wasn't too bothered by that in that way. But it really dented me in terms of like, you just don't look the part and you don't belong there. And so it's something that I've actually quite actively not talked about. When I've been overseas, it hasn't mattered because you're Australian, and they're
Yeah.
like, you've got a weird voice. And so, I lived a decade of my life overseas.
Yeah.
And so I was just the Aussie, and it didn't really matter.
Yeah.
But especially since I've come back, I feel like the person of color conversation and what counts as a diverse something, like growing up not speaking English, but also, coming from a Sri Lankan background, does that count because I'm half European and I'm Australian and I think that's been a very different conversation in the last few years. And it's something that was a big chip on my shoulder. Like, it was probably one of the bigger reasons that I wanted to leave Perth, if I'm honest. When I was growing up there, I felt like people were really disparaging about it. My brother and I had people follow us around shops thinking we were stealing things because they thought maybe we were Aboriginal kids. Not that it would be okay if we were, but that sort of stuff, and I'm certainly, I don't spend anywhere near as much time in the sun now either, and I could certainly be white passing, and that's been something that's come up. But from a cultural standpoint, I'd speak Slovenian and Italian with my grandparents on my mum's side and a bit of Dutch with my dad's side, and, we're schnitzel and curry people. I always joke about it. And it's, now it's like, it's such a proud and wonderful part of my identity. But again, like, my mum was born in a refugee camp just north of Perth in Northam. And my dad was born in Sri Lanka and came out to Australia. And so I'm very much like a new migrant. It's part of the reason I'm also involved in the Catalyzer program.
Right, because I interviewed Usman the other week. Yeah.
Phenomenal man who's doing such incredible work.
Yeah.
And like, I really identify with that, like trying to get a foot in the door and not knowing the right people. And, my mum went to teachers college. My dad didn't go to uni. Like, we didn't grow up with a lot of money, and I don't come from like this, super privileged background, but a lot better than most. I have parents who are, a teacher and an insurance salesman.
Yeah, it's a rich background, really, with all those different languages and cultures and foods. If you look back, I guess you'd see it as a really rich upbringing.
Yeah. I feel so lucky. Yeah. And even from a spiritual point of view, here's another weird thing. Like, my dad was a Catholic priest who then left the priesthood to marry my mom.
Wow.
And so like, I'm now work in this field of, spirituality and how we apply that to real life. And I know that so much of that conversation came from my relationship with my dad and the conversations that we had.
Yeah.
And so again, like, being that kind of outsider, and I'm still kind of unsure about how to talk about that, but I want to be more open about it, because I want it to be, when we're talking about diversity and inclusion and like, I'm more often than not, oh, quick, you're a woman and you kind of know tech stuff. Like, can we get you on as a woman on this program? But it's also kind of like, well, how do we expand who is included here? How do we make sure that we're having conversations with people who might be a journalist who went sideways into tech and didn't do it in a traditional way, but can build a website, but doesn't do it in the way that, other people would? How do we talk to a lawyer who wants to create some kind of, tech product, but they're not seen as worthy or, smart enough, or they're too much of a, white female to count in a space where it's, like, who gets to play and who doesn't get to play?
Yeah.
And, I can very clearly see right now who gets to play and who doesn't get to play. And I can see the anger and frustration, and I felt a lot of it for being excluded in the spaces and not saying the right things. And you're not supposed to be angry about it. You're supposed to be grateful that you get to be able to do this. I've personally found the San Francisco and the US ecosystem, and to that, the Asian ecosystem, a lot more welcoming and inclusive than I have found coming back into Australia. And I came back into Australia with a lot more money to invest and a lot more experience than I left with. I left as a journo. But I haven't always felt super welcome in these communities, and I felt like I've often said the wrong things by kind of pointing that out. And maybe this is sort of the chip on my shoulder about being other and about being outside, but I would like to be a safe haven for people to be included in this, no matter what their background or experience is. Like, the point of startups and innovation and disruption is that we all get to play together to do something and make an impact.
Exactly.
No matter what the success looks like, carrots at the farm gate or a unicorn, there's a lot in between that. And we get to say what that is. So I would like to support that.
That's awesome. So you've transferred that anger into, actually doing something about it and helping others and getting involved with all the programs that you are at the moment. And I salute you for everything that you're doing, Megan. It's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. I think I had to change things. I'll be really honest with you. I was pretty angry and frustrated about it for a while there.
Yeah.
And just felt, like frustrated, unappreciated, overworked, and really having a hard time with that. But I want to create something here, and I really believe in startups and innovation as a way to make bigger swings faster. And if anything, we need to make bigger swings faster in the world.
Yeah.
So I think I've hopefully now found some ways to be able to contribute in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
So that I'm not burning out and I'm not frustrated, but I really feel like I'm adding value. So I hope that I am.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. And I mean, I believe in the whole startup ecosystem as well. I've pretty much realized that I've been an entrepreneur all my life.
Yes.
And I was telling Alan, I won't say the whole story again, but when I was 13, I was making rings out of like melted pewter and all this sort of stuff, gave them to my sister, sell them to your friends at school, and then she gave them all away. So, you got a pricing model there.
Oh man, that was one of my early ones. Like, I think those early entrepreneurial things scar you. I remember making fairy houses with my siblings and the kids in the street. We were getting moss and making them into these, what would now be $100 terrariums, but at the time were these cute little. Yeah. And when we came to divide up the money that we'd made going to door around the street, I just said, "Oh, it's okay. Like, I'll just take whatever's left over." And there was like 5 cents left over, and it was a valuable lesson. Don't take what's left over. Stand up for what you're worth.
Yeah, absolutely. And usually if you do things for free, unfortunately, people don't value that. That was something that I found out in my early days as a homeopath as well. And like, you want to help people, and I mean, some people, like, obviously they haven't got anything, and then you need to help them out.
Yeah, that's different.
A lot of people don't value it.
They've got to have skin in the game is the thing that I've realized, because even people who really want to do a program, and I mean, we do a lot of online programs, for example, here, and part of my role here is building this business and figuring out how we can make the center sustainable by making money. And, but it's also a really altruistic business, right? Like, I don't want to gatekeep mindfulness or compassion. Like, we want to, make that available to everyone. That's why we've got a lot of free resources, and we've got a lot of free webinars and programs, and we give talks and do all that sort of stuff. But if someone wants to engage with a program, they've got to pay for it, because the only thing that makes you show up on week 4 as opposed to week 1 when you're excited and you're kind of like, oh, showing up on week 4 and completing the program and really getting it done is putting down enough money that you really feel like there's something to lose here.
Exactly.
If I don't engage and I don't step into it. And so I think finding, when we're talking about price points and matching your market, like, giving people a little bit of pain to really get what they want out of it as well, like that pain point and that skin in the game, is also a really powerful, important thing.
Absolutely. And we'll leave all that, the links and everything in the show notes, so people can look all that up and hopefully do some of your programs.
Love that.
It's been fantastic having you on, and a really fantastic advice, and love all your story and in your background. And I really appreciate you. I know you're very busy, taking your time out to be on my show today.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thank you for reaching out. And I love how deeply you care about this journey, like having taken it and had your failures yourself and, now really advocating for people coming up. Like, it's the generosity of people like you doing this and being willing to have those conversations and put this together. It means that we're paving the way for a new generation of founders,
That's the
men,
idea.
women,
Yeah.
Different colors, different cultures, to really be able to have access to things like this, and hopefully to be able to learn so that they don't repeat our mistakes.
Exactly. That's what it's all about. All right.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks so much,
Yeah.
Paul.
No, thank you. Thanks, Megan.